All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Free. I'm Ryan, and I'm the pastor here. And it's really good to be with you all tonight. If this is your first time at Free Spiritual Community, uh, you might want to know, you might have figured it out by now with some of the signs and who we are, but this is a community for addicts, loved ones of addicts, and spiritual refugees. Welcome to all of you joining us online. Uh, Y'all, I just posted it. I just shared the live stream, and in my share, I said this is an important one. I truly believe this is an important conversation, an important panel that we're having tonight. So, for those of you online, actually, for those of you here too, click if you jump on Facebook, click the share button, or on YouTube. We're live on YouTube too, as well as our website, freespiritualcommunity.com. And we want to share some hope with people tonight. We want to expose this crisis that's happening and also share some hope. And that's what y'all are doing here tonight. Grateful for our panel members who are here tonight. I'll introduce them in just a moment. But let me say a bit about, real briefly, why we're here. I've said this to our community on Saturday nights. We have our service on Saturday nights at 7 p.m., and I've said for the last several weeks, statistics just came out not too long ago from 2020, and what happened in 2020 was 90,000, 93,000 actually, 93,000 overdose deaths right here in America. That's up from 70,000 the year before. So y'all do the math. That's a major increase in 1 year. I also was saying to a group of people earlier today, this is the longest event we have ever prepared for. We have been preparing for this event for a year and a half. And some of y'all are laughing, and you know why? Because a year and a half ago, this event was supposed to happen tonight with these three people. And it was March of 2020. Do y'all remember what happened March of 2020? The coronavirus hit, and this was the first event we postponed. I didn't know we were going to postpone for a year and a half. And truthfully, my thought was, well, I don't know if we'll do it again because I don't know if it's going to still be an epidemic next year. I don't know if it's going to be a crisis. And well, we were proven really wrong on that one, weren't we? Things went in a pretty negative direction. So this event tonight, this panel discussion tonight, is needed now more than ever statistically. And I promise you, we could go around this room right now. You all online, you could type in the comments too. We've all been affected by this. We know somebody. We know communities this is greatly affecting. So it's why we're here tonight to talk about this crisis, to expose the crisis. It was just yesterday I was standing in the front and someone was getting Chinese food next door, and they came in and they were looking at some of our flyers and asking what we were about. And I said, hey, you ought to come to this panel discussion tomorrow. And I explained it to her, and she said, yeah, I never really dabbled in opioids, but my sister passed away last year of an overdose. It affects everyone, even the strangers in our midst. So it's why we're here tonight. Now, we're also here, though, not just to get an understanding and wrap our heads around the crisis and expose this thing, but also to be a part of the solution. It is why the subtitle to this panel discussion is How You Can Make a Difference. So we want to give some tools, some practical implications. We want to be equipped as communities. How do we address this epidemic, this crisis that is happening in our midst? How do we be a part of the solution? And then there's that kind of third overarching reason, and that is because I know there are some people watching right now. I know there are some people in this room, and you feel so alone. And you're wondering, does anyone know what I'm going through? Does anyone know what it's like to lose a loved one to this? Does anyone know what it's like to watch a loved one battle through this? And in this room, you're going to get a lot of, yeah, me too's. Yeah, me too. People in this room know. And if you're sitting here tonight and you're wondering if you're alone, you're not alone. And in this community, we have a tagline that we say it every Saturday night. It's plastered on our walls. It's plastered on the screen at some point. Yeah, we don't do shame. We don't do shame because we're filled, addicts especially, addicts, loved ones of addicts, and spiritual refugees. They know something about shame. They've been crammed, shame has been crammed down their throat. We don't do it here. Your whole self, your whole story is welcome here. All right, y'all, so I'm glad you're here tonight. Let me take a moment and introduce you to our three panel members because in a minute I'm going to shut up and I'm going to throw it totally to them. And first we have Dr. Lacey Bruman, And man, Lacey and I go way back, like 2 years at least, way back. No, Lacey was in the free community about 2 years ago, maybe even 2.5 years ago. She was leading our peer recovery uh, sessions, coaching classes. So she was leading that with us. A few of us went through that. We've been in contact ever since then. She's been a great resource to this free community. Her passion is to help people stay alive. Her passion is to be an advocate for recovery and an advocate for those who are battling this disease of addiction and the opioid crisis. So I'll read. She's got a bunch of letters after her name. I won't say all of them. One of them is a PhD, but she's also a counselor, extensive career in behavioral health spanning 25 years, both nationally and internationally. Lacey is currently the Senior Director of Behavioral Sciences for Track Tech LLC, an offender rehabilitation compliance company. And Lacey's been a great friend to Tammy and I and to this community. And I need to let you all know, Lacey and her husband just drove in from Austin, Texas, just to be here tonight. I'm so grateful for that. So thank you for being here,
We
Lacey.
love you. Thank you.
And to Lacey's right, we have Josh Geppelt. Josh serves as the Vice President of Programs at the Denver Rescue Mission here in Denver. What can I say about Josh? Josh was our guest storyteller last Saturday night. Josh is passionate for people on the margins, people dealing with being without a home, people that are dealing with this opioid crisis on the daily. And I said earlier today, this one is also a bit personal for Josh. We were going to get together a couple of weeks ago as a team. And Josh got the tragic news that one of his loved ones passed away from an opioid overdose, and he flew out to Alaska to do the funeral, which is never easy to do the funeral of a loved one. But so, Josh, I'm glad you're here, man. I love your heart for faith communities and how faith communities can make a real difference in tragic situations and in the suffering world. So glad you're here, brother. Again, twice in 1 week. And then last but not least, am I doing all right on time? Yes, it is only 7:07. We are kicking it. Casey Lucarelli. She was also a guest. Everyone on here has been a guest storyteller on a Saturday night. So grateful for that. Casey, I'll just read her formal words. Casey's a licensed clinical social worker. She has over a decade of experience working with an array of diverse populations, from homeless veterans to international clients who identify within the LGBTQ plus community. Casey has a private practice and specializes in working with individuals who struggle with substance abuse, codependency, trauma, and shame specific to LGBTQ plus community. And she is going to be a voice for the LGBTQ plus community tonight, and to highlight for us, to share with us some of the unique, the unique circumstances that community faces and when it relates to the opioid crisis. And so, Casey, thank you for being an important voice, and for the spiritual refugees, the ones religion's done a great amount of harm to, and we recognize that in this community, and we talk openly about that. And I'm glad you're here to be a voice of healing and to tell us how we can get involved, and for each of you to give us tools and ways to be part of the solution, not just the crisis, not just to talk about the crisis and the problem, but to really be part of the solution. So thank you all for being here. Lacey, Josh, Casey. All right, y'all. Can we begin with a word of prayer, and then we'll kick things off? Let's pray. God, we give you thanks for this day. We give you thanks for the people at this table, the leaders, community leaders, faith leaders, those who have a passion for doing healing work in a broken world. So, God, we realize the conversation tonight, it's sacred. We realize we have brothers and sisters in our midst who are dying. And God, we want to be a part of the healing, part of the redemptive work in the world. So join with us tonight. Give our speakers wisdom, words to say, hope to give. And for each person sitting here in this room and joining us online, God, fill this space with hope, the kind of hope that only you can give. And so, God, we lift up this night, and what happens here in this place, we lift it all up to you and trust that it is going to be good. It's in your name we pray. Amen. All right, y'all, again, thank you for being here. For those of you, for the studio audience and the online audience, here's what y'all need to know. We have 3 questions. Each panel member is going to get 5 minutes to answer the question. And then, and once you hit your 5 minutes, I'm going to get offensive, all right? I'm going to get offensive. No one curse me out. No one yell at me. I'm just doing my job, all right? So 5 minutes, that means you don't have to, stop mid-sentence, finish your thought, and then we'll keep going. And that's just to keep us on track. We want to be respectful of people's time. We said we'd be out of here by 8:30. We're going to be done by 8:30. God help us. After the questions, I want to leave at least 20 minutes for some questions and response. So I'll walk around with this mic. I'm looking around the corner because I know there's a bunch of you in the back and to the sides. I can't see everyone. So if you have a question, I'll try to walk around and just slip up your hand, and we'll do it that way and let us know who the question is directed towards. So panel members, here's my first question for y'all. And we're going to start this one with Dr. Lacey. In your field or line of work, what truths are you seeing when it comes to the opioid crisis? So this is specific to your work in the world. What truths are you seeing around this?
Thank you, Ryan. So what I am seeing in my field, and mind you, I work with primarily justice-involved individuals, either through wellness courts or federal parole, parole probation, DUI services. And what I am seeing is that people are now willing to talk about this. For many people, it wasn't an issue for them until it started impacting them. You know, it was another person's problem, and now people are willing to talk about it. The state is willing to fund services. We got $450 million in for behavioral health and substance abuse within the ARA monies. So part of the COVID assistance monies will be able to pay for treatment. There's also, I'm sure you guys heard of the opioid settlement discussions that are going with Purdue. Colorado has released a plan. We are expecting another $400 million worth of money to go into that. So we know the biggest issue has been access to care. For many years, Medicaid didn't cover substance abuse treatment services, and you got 1 detox a year. And for most people who are struggling with an addiction, 1 detox visit a year is not going to cut it. And not having other resources, therapists, Medicaid is a challenging bear to handle if you have to bill for it. So you have a lot of people that didn't want to take Medicaid as an insurance, and now Medicaid has improved their coverage. It's improved how much they're paying for services, and we are recognizing that of the justice-involved population in the United States, between 60 and 80% of folks that are either in prisons or jails have an Access 1 diagnosis, meaning either a mental health diagnosis or a substance abuse diagnosis. We cannot keep incarcerating. We need to be treating.
And Lacey, you mentioned the Purdue. Can you just give a brief context for those that might be fuzzy on what's happened and where why that money is coming?
So the attorney generals of many states, Colorado included, sued Purdue. Purdue was the maker of OxyContin, which was overproduced, overprescribed, overutilized, and for many people, actually 5 out of 6 people, they started their addiction by going to their doctor and their doctor providing them an opioid for pain management. So we know that these medications were overprescribed, and then unfortunately when people couldn't get them legally anymore from their doctors, because their doctors now, we'd changed the laws and it's cracked down on their doctors, they started turning to heroin. And unfortunately, with a lot of the heroin that's on the street, fentanyl is rampant with that. In Denver last year, from 2020 to 2021, there were a 300% increase in overdose deaths in the city and county of Denver. So that's why this is very vitally important to this community. We need to know how to respond, and we need to know how to be active and how to stop it.
Thank you, Lacey. Josh, tell us what you're seeing from your point of view, where you are, your work in the world.
Certainly. So I work with folks that are experiencing homelessness, and so I'm not a clinician, I'm not a alcohol or drug therapist, but I attempt.
Hold on, Josh. I'm going to pause you for just a moment. Should I give Josh my mic? Okay, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Okay. So my role really in the community is to provide a. Not bad. Ship's leaving.
I bet you're on now.
We're awake.
I'll sit right here. Yeah.
Perfect. So I think the role I play in the community is just to bring a sense of, I think, openness from the broader community to the unique needs of folks that are experiencing homelessness. And so it's probably not a surprise to anybody that folks experiencing homelessness tend to also have other issues, be it mental health issues or addictions. And as was just mentioned, we've seen a huge increase of the use of opioids at the street level. Part of that is because they're really easy to access. We've seen some shift in kind of what's being used at the street level. And as was just mentioned, they're really, really potent. And so, I mean, we've had folks that we've served for years that have abused drugs at the street level, but we've not had the same issue with people having overdose and then that then causing death. And so I think that's what we're trying to figure out how to respond to is we're used to people using drugs. We're not used to this amount of people that then can't survive that. And so, I mean, some trends that we're seeing with the opioid stuff specifically, in the last 6 months-ish, we've had, I think, 39 overdoses in our shelters. Of those, we administered Narcan, I think, 37 times. 2 of those did not survive. But like, we never, previous, like 4 years ago, even knew what Narcan was in our shelter. And now, like, that's the first training that all of our staff get. Our staff carry it on them every shift. If you don't know what Narcan is, you're gonna hear about it, in a bit. And so, like, it's really reframed our role as providers of shelter, that it's not just a safe place to get out of the weather. It's not some meals. It's not access to sort of how you move through the system towards housing. It really has become how do we create a posture of keeping people alive in the midst of having an existence where they're not seen by the broader society. So that's the role I attempt to play every day, and I think there are days I'm more successful than others.
Yeah, and Josh, can you just say really quick, you said it's, and I realize online you might not be able to hear me, so you might want to repeat this question, but you said it's more accessible now than it was even last year or 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago. Can you speak to just what you're seeing with accessibility?
Sure. And so I'm also not a police officer or work for the FBI or whatever. But what I hear is as we have legalized substances in America and created distribution and production channels in America, that has displaced production issues outside of our country. And so people want to make money. And so they have adjusted what they're bringing into America to keep that cash flow going. And from what I hear, opioid, especially because you can make synthetics pretty cheaply, is a really easy thing to produce. It's very easy to transport. And so that's what I am told is a primary reason that we see it on the street level. Because it used to be years ago, as we heard, the primary use was either heroin and primarily injection use, which that tends to not be that's more rare. And or folks that they're introduced through a pill because their doctor gave it to them. And so as we've seen some of those channels adjust, we see now opioids on the street. It's not coming in pill form, and people don't know what they're getting. And I mean, opioid versus fentanyl is the difference between like a Toyota Prius and a Mack truck. I mean, and if you don't know, I mean, you're not able to think about like, well, what's this dose I'm taking? And historically, that's been easier to process through, especially at the street level with, be it meth or cocaine or things like that we've seen historically. They've not had the same impact on the user. So,
Back and forth with you guys. Thank you, Josh. We're going to throw it to Casey. Casey, tell us from your work in the world, your point of view, your perspective, what are you seeing happening?
I work more with the individual, obviously. So specifically LGBTQ. Huge crisis. 3 times more likely to develop a opiate use disorder, given why, right? Some say surgeries, I say, right, dealing with microaggressions on a daily basis, internalized homophobia, transphobia on a daily basis, swimming in shame, which is a huge one, coming into these even rooms like this. And then also just microaggressions, the constant misgendering is huge, right? So what do I turn to? A substance. Higher rates of substance use within the community. Oftentimes the opiate use, right, get hooked on by a doctor, given surgery. Happened to me, happened to my sister, family members. Doctors push on this prescription, and then what do? They cut you off, right? When I dealt with it, going through the withdrawals and whatnot, whatever, but I was able to manage it. Some of them aren't. And then finding your identity after the injury, right? Who am I now that I can't do this task? Because I lost that. A lot of the work I do is around identity. Who am I without this addiction? And who am I in the world? And how do I feel comfortable in my own skin? Lots of shame. Lots of shame. I always say our community is notoriously known for isolating, right? I'm going to stay safe. I'm going to remain small. I'm in the comfort of my own home. The outside world, what do I get? Microaggressions. And it could be as small as a bathroom sign, right? Going in male or female, gender neutral bathrooms. So little things like that. And I think with the opiate crisis, it's happening everywhere. It's touching every one of us. Doctors are pushing, right? And methadone clinics work, yes, but there's a Band-Aid too, right? Overprescribing methadone. My sister was hooked on methadone. You give out methadone with no resources and no treatment, it's just swapping addictions. So huge impact just on the community as a whole, and I think with fentanyl rising, and it's scary. It's extremely scary. Personally, it touched me in the pandemic. I lost 2 people due to overdoses. Why? Fentanyl. So it's a huge, huge crisis.
And Casey, that's something we haven't really talked about yet. I mean, we talked about 2020, but what happened in 2020 was this big pandemic, right? The COVID-19, and so can you talk about just some of the isolation you saw that happened over the year, and really how that leads people? Isolation is a really dangerous thing for us, alcoholics, addicts. Isolation is deadly. Can you talk a little bit about how that played out?
Right. So a lot of my younger clients, right? So I work with some adolescents and young adults. And when the pandemic hit, school was their safety. School is where they felt affirmed, right? Teachers were honoring their pronouns, honoring their names. Home was unsafe. So being isolated, not only in your home with your family, it's not a safe place, right? Totally detrimental to the individual because they're not able to connect with the community. I talk about how we tend to isolate and remain small, given what we went through, going back to the microaggressions and the shame that we endured, and my own internalized homophobia and transphobia. And a lot of the clients that I work with aren't even aware of it. They're not even aware of the impact it has on them going in and checking a box, right? Male or female. It's very black and white thinking that we have. And I'll get into it more on the other questions, but Did I answer that question?
And we're gonna stay with you for just a minute because we're gonna start with you for the second question, and I want you to talk about some of the barriers and obstacles that you see in your work, particularly with your work with. I know you work with. Is it teenagers?
So it's, yeah, adolescents to young adults.
Adolescents to young adults in the LGBTQ community. What barriers and obstacles are you seeing? I'm assuming shame is certainly one of those. And I want you to address, where do you see some of the most innovative work being done?
Innovative. So barriers, lack of education. Lack of education within our education system. Then also within treatment, and then agencies, different agencies, lack of education as a whole. A lot of kiddos don't have access to resources, especially LGBTQ, so not even being exposed to it, right? So that cognitive isolation, if I am not even aware and that's a possibility for me, I'm going to remain small. And then also social isolation, I am different from. So treatment centers specifically, right, like they have this new term, it's called LGBTQ friendly, right? What does that mean?
What does it mean?
Okay, you're gonna be nice to me, like. So there's like this big uproar of, thanks, you're friendly, but it does prevent from going to treatment. Am I in a safe place?
Yeah.
I worked at a LGBTQ specific treatment center, and still, the number one thing that comes up is, am I gay enough? Do I fit in? Because given in a society where we're always left out. A lot of schools are becoming more aware, so I think by educating and providing groups and resources for these kiddos, so they do have a safe place to explore identity and explore sexuality, where they don't feel alone. Community is everything, but it's hard when the world is telling you no, right? Yeah. Like everyone is saying no, but here I am. High rates of suicide. I mean, all of the clients that I worked with that identify within this community at least attempted suicide once.
Yeah, and Casey, can I interrupt you for a moment?
Yes.
Because I want you to say those statistics again. Because undoubtedly someone is watching right now, or maybe someone's in the room saying, come on, affects us all. Why are we focusing in on one community? Why does Casey have to be here to focus in on one community? Because people are dying at a more rapid pace in that community. So can you repeat those statistics you started with?
Yeah,
and suicide statistics. It's just so important to know.
I mean, suicide is rampant.
Yeah.
So 3 times more likely to develop an opiate use disorder compared to a heterosexual. So lesbian, gay, or bisexual, you have 3 times more likely to develop this disorder. I hate to call it disorder. It's trauma response. And then another thing is, not as an adolescent, right? 90% chance that you are going to use. So if my kiddo, right, identifies within the community, 90% chance that they are going to use a substance. And that's common. Within the gay community, it's a lot of chemsex, so a lot of methamphetamine and GHB in combination with other pills.
What is chemsex?
So chemsex is methamphetamine use, GHB, the date rape drug, and then sex. So engaging in sex while high. And most of the community that I worked with, gay men, haven't even experienced intimacy or sex without the use of a substance. A lot of people that I know that use opiates, they love them. Why? Because I feel nothing. I don't want to feel anything. Then going back to a personal thing is, when my sister was getting methadone, standing in line, you get your methadone, and then you leave, right? But then getting hooked on the methadone. And they don't taper you. Some places don't taper you off, right? Because they're making this, right? So it goes back to money. And eventually she just stopped. She's like, I'm just going to stop this, and I'm going to do it on my own. And that's how she got sober. But a lot of people going in line, standing in line, getting their methadone, and then getting hooked on it, right? And yes, it's harm reduction, but that I think more education and more resources need to be implemented in order for the individual to actually heal. Because there's so many layers. No one wakes up and wants to go, I want to be an addict, right?
Yeah.
They wake up because they are in pain and they are using the substance for a solution to make them feel better. It's a crisis of trauma, if you ask me.
Yeah. So, Casey, you have a minute and a half left. Can you say 90 seconds? Where's the most innovative work being done? Where are you seeing it?
I think within our school systems, I think schools are being more aware and providing education and resources to the LGBTQ community. I was just back in Connecticut, what was that, 2 years ago maybe? And I was speaking to a high school, and there he had like 7 suicides within that 1 year. But they actually had a place for all these individuals to come together and really have a safe place where, hey, I get it, me too, right? And a lot of people don't understand maybe like how much of the microaggressions that we endure. I'll give you an example. I was consulting with a professional, and she worked with postpartum depression clients, and she goes, "Oh, don't worry, your community doesn't have to deal with that." And that's a professional.
Yeah.
So there's so many layers of educating,
Yeah.
because we were conditioned, right? As a society, we were conditioned, blue or pink, right? Male or female. And one thing is we want to belong. We just want to belong. And we feel like we belong nowhere, but we belong everywhere. And that's the thing where we have to kind of shift.
Yeah. Thank you, Casey. We're going to shift it over to the fella on your left, Josh. What obstacles and barriers are you seeing that are getting in the way of healing? And where are you seeing the most innovative work?
Yeah, I think for folks experiencing homelessness, one issue that we saw in the midst of the pandemic that is starting to correct itself is places shut down. And so there were a lot of providers, be it mental health providers or addiction treatment providers, that were in person, that in response to COVID sent all of their staff home and attempted to do treatment via Zoom. And treatment via Zoom is great if you have a place to sit on a computer with Wi-Fi, and if you own a computer, and if you, and so for folks experiencing homelessness, that transition was really difficult because we didn't have the same type of access. And so we've had to make a lot of adjustments in our shelters to try to figure out how do we co-locate services within shelters, how do we create spaces where folks can access video chat-based treatment, because there are some systems that are like, oh man, we just reduced a bunch of overhead. This is great for us. This is now our new normal. And it's like, well, that's great, but it doesn't work for folks who don't have access to those, to those platforms and that technology. And so that's been a big barrier for us. Even prior to the pandemic, as was mentioned before, most folks experiencing homelessness are on Medicaid, and like the treatment opportunities that are afforded in Medicaid aren't very great. They tend to be outpatient only. In the treatment world, that is not as robust of an opportunity as inpatient is. And then outpatient, again, a lot of that treatment model is built on the assumption that you're returning to a safe place, when you're not in treatment during the day. And so when folks aren't doing that and don't have the stability of a home to go to, it really impacts how well that treatment is working for them. And so again, we're trying to figure out ways within our sort of rehousing system of how do we co-locate these type of treatment opportunities where people are already staying? How do we create an environment within shelters that we can offer those services, as opposed to the old school thinking of like, oh, if you need that, you can opt in, we can send you somewhere. And so we're really just having to rethink how that system will work best for folks that don't have a home yet. I think also in the pandemic, one thing that we saw that I think was an increase in why people used was, when you're homeless and you live in a shelter, most people don't want to hang out at the shelter all day long because folks don't want to be reminded that they're homeless. And so pre-pandemic, if you weren't employed, if you weren't working, you had the whole community that, if you weren't causing a ruckus, you could walk from the shelter downtown on the 6th Street Student Mall. You could go hang out at a coffee shop. You could do all these things. You could go down to the library. There were ways that you could engage to help life feel normal, apart from, experiencing homelessness and having to spend the night in a shelter. Well, when all those systems shut down, and your world is just the shelter, that became very overwhelming for a lot of people. And so they had to kind of face the reality 24/7 that like, no, I'm homeless, and this is all that's really that I can access in this season of life. And we saw a lot of people, I mean, just go downhill quickly, just into deep depression because, you know, the things in life that they were able to access before that helped them feel, you know, normal, you know, helped them feel a part of society, all got turned off overnight.
Yeah.
And so we're still trying to figure out what we do for that. We're still trying to figure out, like, how do we create more normalcy within shelters? Again, recognizing that it's a system that's assuming day one that you're not going to stay here long. I mean, it's really supposed to be designed to get you out, but we need to figure out a way to make it feel a little bit more like home, a little bit more community in the shelter, which is, I mean, we're still trying to figure that out. I think treatment in general, you know, we talk about statistics, you know, we're told that somewhere between 50 and 65% of folks experiencing homelessness have a substance use disorder. The age-old question is, you know, was that disorder the catalyst for their homelessness, or was the disorder, or was their homelessness a catalyst for the use? And it really doesn't matter. The issue is that you have people that, again, are trying to figure out how to move through a system that's not easy to navigate, to move through a system that tells them that it wants to rehouse them, but face, you know, issue after issue after issue that makes it really, really hard to do. And so oftentimes, as you mentioned before, I mean, I think it's people that would never be able to would ever be able to name trauma as the source, but like they're really self-medicating because of the trauma that they're experiencing and just the utter hopelessness they feel because of their situation.
So Josh, you have 1 minute left. Tell us where the most innovative work is being done, and really thank you all for highlighting for us, for putting a human face to it. Really important, for putting a human face to, those battling isolation in COVID. I mean, it was hard for everyone, but for the homeless community, I mean, you're putting the human face to that. Thank you for doing that, Josh, and for you, the LGBTQ community. But Josh, where's the where's the innovation?
What I'm seeing, the hope for, especially treatment for folks experiencing homelessness, are agencies that are willing to come into shelters, that are willing to come into traditional housing types of programs and offer the treatment on site. Because again, it used to be, you know, you came to us either for outpatient, or if you could afford to or have the right coverage, you came to us for inpatient. And to see agencies that are also challenging themselves, how do we bring treatment to an existing system and try to embed that opportunity within the system? Because I mean, we do homelessness, and while we have a recovery program, you know, it's not substance abuse. It's more life stability. And so to have agencies that are willing to come to us and partner with us has been very innovative, and we're seeing great results from that.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for that, Josh. Lacey, what's keeping us from healing, and where's the innovation?
This could be like a whole dissertation worth of question. So I will be 5 minutes succinct because I don't want to be the only one that gets the bell.
There you go.
Thanks. I honestly believe that stigma is still a huge issue. We are willing to talk about it more openly now, but when you look at mental health and substance abuse is listed in the DSM-5, which is the diagnostic Bible for, you know, mental health, we still don't do a good job addressing stigma. The mental health system kind of looks at it as it's your behavior. We have a brain disease. You know, the mental health will say we have the brain disease. The reality is it's all a brain disease. You can't carve apart the body. We look at, you know, I fully agree with trauma. We are a society that has multi-generational trauma that no one wants to talk about. And until we can start unpacking some of that harm that has been done and continues to be done, we are going to continue to have challenges. Free, and part of the reason I love Free is you are actually willing to talk about this from a pulpit. I have seen, and I get around. I travel all over the place. I get around, and I get to go to a lot of different services. Maybe they will talk about it during Mental Health Awareness Week. It's rare a church will do anything for an overdose awareness month, let alone have a discussion from the pulpit about an overdose day. And that's wrong, because people will go to their church for assistance in many instances first. Families will go and seek counsel, and our pastors are just not equipped because there is such stigma that still exists, with that in a lot of our communities. I also believe that we really need to change how we fund healthcare in this country. I personally come from the pathway that everyone should be entitled to healthcare. We should not be battling over, you have a better job, you have insurance, because we've seen so many of our folks that work in the hospitality system during COVID that lived on cash salaries, that were scraping together to survive in this rent market before, and they've been unemployed because their restaurants are not open, they're not serving, they've cut hours, they've cut capacity. So we have a lot of reform to do. We have a lot of work to do, and it's got to be from the ground up, because trying to do it from the top down, it took the government 15 years to come up with a HIPAA discussion, and we've seen how HIPAA works. So we don't want them to fix this. We want to take it and own it at the community level.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I appreciate with the state plan, if the Purdue settlement ever goes through, is that money will come through the state and go to the local communities. And those communities will decide how they are going to treat substance abuse in their communities. So I appreciate that. Usually communities don't have the voice at that table.
Yeah. Good stuff, Lacey.
So-
You're speaking our mission, breaking the silence of addiction. It's
Innovative?
Yeah, tell us the
I
innovation.
would be torn on my votes. I believe technology has made a difference. I know in the criminal justice arena, we actually have POs now that are using technology. They are not charting on the teletype anymore. They still exist, but they are becoming educated, and they are becoming supportive of helping people get into treatment and to pay for treatment. So technology has come a long ways in that arena. I think the government has also made an awareness that this epidemic isn't going away, and to take no action is incredibly harmful. So we are seeing, $450 million come into the state that will fund people leaving jails that are very high risk with Narcan in their hand. We are seeing jails offer medication-assisted treatment when previously they would not have. We are seeing them partner with treatment providers to do co-responder models with the police. We're seeing a lot happen in transformational justice. It's been a long time coming. It's going to be a long time to get to where we need to go. But the fact that many states are talking about not having a cash bail anymore, because for a lot of people that are struggling on the streets with addiction, if they get picked up for a trespassing charge and they can't make bail, they sit in jail and sit in jail and sit in jail. And that is ludicrous.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of reform that's coming with that. I also am going to throw a cue out to the sober livings that are here. 10 years ago, sober living didn't exist. It didn't exist. Recovery coaches didn't exist. You were court ordered to go to AA. That was your treatment path. That was the only path. That was, you made it or you didn't make it. And now we have recovery coaches that walk alongside people who are in recovery.
Yeah.
And we are using SAMHSA's definition of recovery, meaning recovery starts, you are in recovery when you say you are in recovery. It's not at 30 days, it's not at 90 days. It starts the day you are ready to start recovery. And coaches have been able to take their life experience and turn it into a job and really, really help people. especially people that were turned off by 12-step because they were court ordered to go to it before. And I have nothing against 12-step. It is a path of recovery. But I think we have an army of coaches out there that are really working to make life different for people. And that is huge. I consider them to be professional extenders, just like I would nurses and PAs. They are out on the street and they are making a difference. So
Thank you for that, Dr. Lacey. And if you all are, I know you all online obviously aren't in the room, but all the new people I met tonight are connected to Lacey in some way. She's coached them, trained them. It's like, my goodness, you've impacted a lot of people, my life included. So thank you for that, Lacey. And there was something else I wanted to say about what you were talking about. And I cannot remember. Oh, sober living houses. It's been one of the greatest things we have at Free is to have so many great partners of different sober living houses and recovery coaches that are in this community. We rely on those people, and they are great friends of this community. And so thank you for lifting them up. Y'all are awesome and making a big difference in the community. Okay, in my notes, I have that we should be beginning question 3 by 7:45. It is 7:45. Y'all are doing great. Look at this. It's like y'all trained for it or something. Okay, so our last question, I want this to be, we are a faith community, a spiritual community. We abide by spiritual principles. So I would love for you all to talk about, as spiritual people or faith communities, what is your response to this crisis, your personal response, but then in a more collective way, what's our bigger response? And Josh, we're going to start with you.
I'm probably going to get dinged here.
Okay, I'm going to start the timer now.
So yes, I would identify as a person of faith. I grew up in church. I used to work at a church. All my education has been with and through religious organizations and institutions. So I am probably as steeped in the faith community as one can be, and probably have all the scars to prove it. And so I'm speaking personally. I think that I view it through a theological lens of, we're all created in God's image. And if that is true for me, and when I need it to be true for me is when I'm in my, in my worst, right?
Yeah.
Then it's true for everyone else when they're in their worst. And so I think that inspires me to constantly reframe how I view people, try to stop the tendency to other, stop the tendency to create some stratification of life issues and life concerns that, quite frankly, the religious community has indoctrinated all of us in. The idea we were talking earlier about, depending upon what church tradition that you grew up in, the front row is either for the worst people in the room or the most pious people in the room. But the point being that, every faith community is conditioned to determine who's the worst person in the room and who's the most pious person in the room. And so that's the theological lens that I attempt to view people through. And then I think the edict in the New Testament that I still don't even begin to understand are the words of Christ when he said that the primary goal is to love our neighbor. And I think much like we read in Scripture, one of the first questions was like, well, who's my neighbor? And I think too often as faith communities, we spend way too much time trying to argue over who qualifies as my neighbor, as opposed to trying to determine, well, what does love actually look like in this situation? And I say we because, me too. I haven't figured it out. And so I think personally, I struggle every day. I'm like, well, crap, is that person my neighbor? And, in this last year, COVID and politics, and there's lots of opportunities to determine if I actually want to view someone as my neighbor or not. And so, and I actually find it way easier to view people experiencing homelessness on the streets as my neighbor than some of my suburban real neighbors. But that's how I would answer it personally. From a community standpoint, from a professional standpoint, I tend to curse a lot when I try to talk about what the faith community should be doing in response to some of these issues versus what they are doing. Again, an opportunity to ask myself who my neighbor is. But I think all too often in faith communities, we we as leaders like to position issues outside of our community. Because that means we don't have responsibility for it. Because, if we're pastors and shepherds, well, these are my people. And if the issue doesn't, involve my people, then I can ignore it. And I think too often, as we've already talked about, people don't usually raise their hand and say, hey, I have an addiction. I know in my suburban church context, last year, 3 people went to treatment. From my, little quaint suburban white middle class church. The reality is I know of about 9 more that should have, and I think that churches have opportunities to really look at sort of, hey, when you gather, this is my church, and if my pastor's listening, when you gather, if every gathering requires alcohol, you probably have a problem in your community. And if you don't recognize that then doesn't create a safe space for people in recovery, you're ignorant to the fact that there's people in recovery in your community. I was actually at a men's retreat when one of my friends said, like, hey, there's booze everywhere. I don't feel safe here. And it's unfortunate when people in recovery are the ones that have to raise their hands and name that for communities that are supposed to exist on behalf of others. So, again, I don't have a lot of nice words for faith communities when it comes to this.
But you know what's beautiful about that, Josh, is you can totally say that, and thank you for saying that.
Sure.
Man, you said some beautiful words there. Like, pastors, if you're watching, take note on what he just said. Faith leaders. If your community has to gather, every gathering has to have booze, and it's the cool thing to do now, and we're just going to be welcoming, take note on what Josh just said. And you can say it because you are on the inside. You're an insider on this
just
stuff.
barely.
So, barely. You're almost. You're at the margins of it. But
Yeah.
but you know what? You can talk. You can give that feedback and that critique because of that position. And
Yeah.
thank you for doing that.
Do I have time left?
All right. And that's no. Go ahead. I'm gonna give 60 more seconds, Josh. Go ahead. 60 seconds.
No, I was going to try to end on a positive note. I think there's lots of opportunity for communities of faith to get more involved. I think it starts with acknowledging the fact that the issue does not exist outside of your walls, but it is in your pews every Sunday. I think that's the easiest way to start because you already have relationship there. You don't have to drive across town to engage in the issue because it's everywhere. I think with that as well is you don't have to have all the answers. I think too often when we train pastors, we lead them to believe that they're supposed to have the answer to everyone's problems, which results in pastors trying to have the answers to everyone's problems. And so I think there's a resistance to engaging because people don't feel like they have credibility. They don't feel like they have the skill set. There's a church I know of in suburban North Denver that they now have an addiction counselor on staff full time. That in my mind is a picture of a church that realizes, hey, this is actually our problem too.
Innovative work.
Yeah, and so I think there's opportunity in addiction counselors don't get paid enough, so it's not that expensive to hire one. Yeah, you should be. But there is really easy opportunity to create access. Because as a church, if you can pay an addiction counselor, that means that people that are seeing that person don't have to be charged. And the access you can create for people that don't have the insurance, that don't have the ability, that they can't, schedule their life around recovery meetings or whatever. That's a gift you can give that I can't imagine if you stood up on the pulpit on a Sunday morning and ask your congregation to fund that you're not going to get that funded. The problem is no one's asking their congregation to fund that. And I'll be quiet now.
Yeah, dude. No, I hope churches are watching and paying attention. You spoke some good words, dude. Prophetic words. Lacey.
I am going to pick up where you left off.
Okay.
I think pastors need to understand the resources that exist in the community. Do not be just the pastor that pastors the funeral. If you are losing people in your community, you need to recognize that that is an issue in your community and host a Celebrate Recovery. They are always looking for locations that they can have and recognize that there are some very, September is Overdose Awareness Month. Have someone come in. Invite ministries that are working with people that struggle with addictions to do tables so people can walk around between services and gain information. Feed people. You know, we talk
Literally.
about housing insufficiency, but having food banks, those are huge, huge issues for people that are coming out of struggles. And you know, enlighten people that if they're going to donate peanut butter, that it should be creamy peanut butter, because many people that struggle with addictions have dental issues and they can't chew the crunchy peanut butter. So, you know, there's a lot of little things churches can do, but I think as a society as a whole, you need to be talking, we need to be talking to our leaders. We passed legislation last year that is going to require every pharmacist to counsel about Narcan, and we're going to talk about Narcan in a while. And we had 14 people that showed up to testify, and they shared heart-wrenching stories. It just, I mean, we had legislators in tears, and these were people, for the most part, that had never had maybe a positive encounter with a government agency. And they went down, and several of them are here tonight, and they called their legislators and they helped educate, and we actually had a bipartisan bill. Once the governor signed it into order that now says, pharmacists, if you are prescribing a opioid or an opioid and a benzo prescription, you have to counsel the person that Narcan exists. Because we also recognize that a lot of the overdoses occur not because of the person that got the prescription, but because of someone else that took that prescription in the household.
Yep.
So we need to put that education out there, and we need to have churches that are willing to step up and host trainings that can train their congregation around Narcan. Narcan is covered by 96% of the insurance agencies' insurance plans. Colorado has a standing order, so you can walk into any pharmacy if they stock it and request Narcan. So we have some gifts to give in a little bit, but I know I'm getting close to my time too, and I fear the bell.
1 minute left.
So vote, because we charge very few people that are supposed to be masters of our entire universe knowledge, and these are farmers, and these are teachers, and these are realtors. They are not experts on everything. So we need to share our stories. We need to put a face on the epidemic for people here, because they are the ones that make the votes, and they are the ones that pass the laws. And unless we educate them that this is something that happened to me and it happened to my family, and I'm tired of going to funerals, they don't get that message. So if you don't want to meet with them in person, pick up the phone. If you don't know who they are, you can go on Google and figure out by your zip code who they are. And I don't care whether they're blue, purple, or red. We had legislators that spoke out that it impacted them, and they were a demographic in the political realm that may not vote to spend money on something like this. But it's really important when you have bond issues coming up that support mental health and substance abuse to vote. The other thing that's really important that we have to do is we have to support our legislators to get rid of the ban the box fully implemented. What that means is if you have a felony, employers right now cannot ask if you are a felon. They have to talk to you first. And not all the employers have been good about fixing their employment applications for people. If people can't get jobs, they can't get housing, they can't get food, they're not going to last in recovery for a long period of time without the supports wrapped around them. And as a community, we need to wrap those supports around folks.
Thank you, Lacey. We're going to throw it to Casey, and then we're going to throw it to you all in the in-house audience to ask some questions of our panel members. But Casey, what's your response? What's our response
Yeah, so just even like looking at this question gives me anxiety.
We don't do shame.
So, right, coming from my background, Catholic, grew up Catholic, right? Go to hell because of who I am.
Yeah.
That's what I was conditioned, right? So, what I realized within my community, growing up in a religious background, there's tremendous amounts of shame.
Yep.
There's no inclusivity because this person's telling me I'm going here if I identify as this, right? So again, looking at language. I think there's a big gap. I think we need spirituality. I found my spirituality. I never connected with the word God, just because of what I experienced and what I went through, and there was such a disconnect. So finding faith, I find faith in people. I see God, my God, in people. I believe we all meet for a reason, regardless if they're a little wacky or not. But they're in our life for a reason, right? To teach us the lesson. But a huge problem within the community about even being included into services, right? Of being welcomed and feeling comfortable, finding people that look like me and identify like me. Huge problem, especially with conversion therapy. It's still going on. Pray the gay away.
Yeah. Do you want to say, you just said it, but what is conversion therapy for those
So
that may not know?
basically, going in for treatment, but you're praying that you're taking the homosexuality out of you, in a sense. I'm
Yeah.
treating the gay person to hopefully, in turn, make them heterosexual. There's a great documentary on Netflix called Pray Away to learn more about it. But that's still happening in 2021. So working with clients that experience that, right, and unraveling all of that, there's so many layers. And I think just by, as a community as a whole, providing a safe place, so celebrating our community during Pride Month, like little things, putting that sign, gender neutral sign on the door where the person feels welcomed. Again, going back to black and white, pink or blue, always having to choose. If the person comes in here into a church or wherever and there's a sign on the door that says, "Oh, I see you," right? I see you and you're welcomed. You don't have to choose, right? You belong. Constantly affirming. And not just saying I'm LGBTQ friendly. What does that actually mean? And going back to education, looking at the language that we're using. A lot of they, them, there, right? The pronouns are confusing, right? But we do it all the time. What happens when someone gets married? They change their last name, right? So looking at how we're using language and what is it? And if you're unaware and you don't know, ask. I think a lot of assuming. There's a lot of assuming and judgment because I don't look like this, or if I don't identify like this, then I don't belong. As a society as a whole, we're swimming in fear, right? Where I think collectively, if we come together and without judgment, right? Why does my addiction have to, like, there's so much shame around injection and safe sites to inject, right? Like, what is that about? Harm reduction? But then what's the difference between going to the bar and drinking to oblivion? There is no difference. It just looks different. They're all doing it for the same reason. And I think just if we get out of the fear and step into awareness and consciousness of how we're talking to people and how we're communicating and providing a safe place that you feel welcomed and reducing that minority stress will happen because more are going to be able to come out. And I think that just shows with the numbers, right? Statistically, more in our community. Why? Because they're starting to feel safer.
Yeah.
And providing a safety net, which is huge. It's a crazy thing with religion, right? Of especially within this community of you are this and you are going here. And tremendous amounts of shame. I am bad for who I am.
Yeah.
I am going here because I identify like this. So if I'm my true self and I'm authentic and I'm living my life, but yet I have this noise in the background of, no, this is wrong. And it's still there. It doesn't necessarily go away because we have been conditioned, right? Conditioned as a society. Pick a box. And I think just stepping back and allowing and educating, right? Of looking at pronouns. What's coming up for me that I am uncomfortable, right? What's coming up for me that I can't honor this person's pronouns? And taking a look at self, right? At your own projections, because this is all just a projection.
That's hard work, though. That you're
Yeah.
talking about self-reflection. That's difficult work. And sorry, Casey, I've got to cut you off.
Sure.
Thank you so much, though, for breaking the silence on issues that really need to be broken the silence of. Thank you for that. Thank you for putting words to it and articulating it and giving this community something to think about, too. Thank you all so much for that. I want to throw it to the community here for questions. If we have any online questions, I'm going to trust someone in the back to let me know that. But Derek, would you be willing to pass around the mic to anyone who might raise their hand and hold the mic for them? It keeps that person from getting nervous and then rambling on their dissertation. So, and if you have a question, state who the question is for. And if it's for Josh, you got to give the mic back to Josh. So just slip up your hand and we'll get a mic to you, and feel free to ask your questions.
Is this on?
Oh, it's on now.
My name is Stephanie. This question, I guess, is for all of you or anybody who might know. Is there any sort of push or movement or whatever for our first responders or our police officers to be a little more educated? Because I've just had an instance in my life where a police officer was suggesting that she'll be okay here for 2 nights before the sober house opens up. She should be okay here with you. And she was dead the next morning because I'm guessing they're not an addict and they don't think with an addict brain. So I'm curious if there's any talk about having our first responders and police officers be a little more educated about it as well.
So I'm actually going to toss that to a retired fire chief who's sitting next door to you.
The neighbor.
Because he could better answer that. Yes, we do provide training. Chief Bruman.
Yeah, that's actually part of our curriculum now in the fire department here in Denver, and then all of the metro agencies is evaluating when we see that. Part of the knowledge we're trying to incorporate into the medical training is knowing what you don't know and knowing not to make those judgments, and to have somebody come in. And now in Denver we have a 2-tiered system: fire department, and then EMS comes, and the paramedics will generally require a certain criteria be met before somebody is left in that type of circumstance. We also, everybody carries a Narcan. Police are carrying Narcan now as well. And the police departments have incorporated what they call a CIT program, which is a critical incident training that they have. So they have specialists that if that officer doesn't know, they're required to call one of the people who are trained 24/7, and they come out to the scene and they make a formal assessment. So that might have been a mistake in that particular individual's assessment of that situation. But yeah, police and fire are training just for that. And real quick, I have a question for Dr. Baruman. What are those little packets that everybody has, if you could explain that?
We're going to talk about that with closing remarks.
Jumping the gun.
There was one in the very back.
I got it.
Thank you, Derek. So, and let me just say before this person asks a question, if you're joining us online, we have a whole section here in the back that I don't think the camera is able to capture, so you won't be able to see this person. And that's okay.
Okay. Hi, my name's Robbie. Dr. Lacey, I was released from the BOP in 1997. I've also been in and out here. I was homeless or either incarcerated for over 22 years. Josh, I've spent many a nights at your place. My biggest question I have, it's 2 questions. I have one for Josh and one for Dr. Lacey. So I have been very beneficial at the tail end of all my incarceration stuff through the wages program, and to see what has happened in the last 21 years in the state of Colorado. And I just want to say, whoever's involved in that, thank you, because there are truly people that are benefiting, and I am one of those from that program. I don't know if it was the wages program or if it was Medicaid who actually enabled us to start being able to get neurotherapy and EMDR therapy paid for by them, or the wages program. But that was a game changer in my life. It's been a game changer since day one, and I don't know how we can get it started for everybody else, but it needs to be.
DR is a trauma treatment that he's talking about, and it requires a lot of significant high intensity training to be able to do it. So again, we're putting more providers out there, and more providers are willing to accept it now because they can actually bill for it.
And I think that at some point the state of Colorado has gone from the fluffy excuse my language, but the fluffy bullshit classes where we just tell you how to do this or how to do that and not really teach anything and take my money and go away, to actually teaching some classes. So thank you.
Awesome. So glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Robbie Lee.
And Josh, I'll be real quick, I promise. So I went down the other week, a couple weeks ago, and I saw the new Lawrence Street, how you guys have changed down there and done beautiful things, and you guys should be commended for that, because it's an amazing, the old side that's been changed to the new side again, it's amazing. And also my question to you is this. So we both know that most of the providers are downtown. St. Francis Center, Catholic Charities across the street, blah, blah, blah. We could go on and on and on. Now that the shelter has mainly moved to 48th in Colorado, is there a process that is being offered to the homeless population to get downtown, to get to the providers on a daily basis that they need to get to, which were in close proximity before, that are not in close proximity now? And that's it. Thank you.
That's a great question. There is work in progress to do that. So what he's referring to is we've shifted over the last 18 to 24 months. It started pre-pandemic where now it used to be that our primary overnight emergency shelters across the system were primarily in downtown Denver. Our facility, Catholic Charities, Salvation Army, most of you know where they are. And then in partnership with the city, they started purchasing facilities out near I-78 Colorado Boulevard. And so we actually now have more overnight shelter beds in that neighborhood in the city and county of Denver than we do downtown. The issue that he's bringing up, though, is a lot of the support services were downtown and so still are downtown. And so we're trying to tackle it not to create connectivity of our residents to get downtown, but to have those services embedded in the shelters that are now sort of in the Park Hill neighborhood. So that's the attempt that's underway right now.
Hi, my name is Amber. Along the lines of that following question, so for agencies or said individuals who are looking to engage with said shelters, where these services are most beneficial brought in-house, what would be the next step for said agencies or individuals, and who would be the ideal point of contact?
Who's that question for? I think.
So yeah, one of the things that we're trying to work through in the shelter system is understanding what services are appropriate to be provided in a shelter system that is geared towards shelter exit. And so we're really trying to understand if an engagement needs time, then starting that in the shelter where that service can't follow a person as they move out is not effective for the person that's receiving services. And so that's our current struggle, is there's a whole lot of intervention styles that take more time than the average length of stay for people in shelters. And so as we try to embed services, we're also trying to understand a way to do that we're not creating more issues for folks that are seeking those services. So it's a very fluid, you can get on our website and track me down. I'm not the right person, but I can connect you with the right person. DenverRescueMission.org.
Other questions? Oh, back in. Derek, there's no coffee on my table, so you can't spill it this time.
A question I have, and for anybody who wants to take this, but I think it's uncomfortable for anybody who isn't on this side of the fence and understands the opioid crisis. And I would love for the audience online and in here to hear, maybe Dr. Lacey, how to approach the conversation for someone that they are worried about in their life and how to breach that, because I think that's a scary thing. And oftentimes when it's somebody you love a lot, it can turn into a scary fight. So for anybody that's watching that is worried or does have a loved one in their life and they just don't know how to breach that conversation or how to begin the process of getting someone help, Dr. Lacey, maybe you can start and give people some advice on how to do that.
Ooh, okay. I think first and foremost, going back to what Casey said, we need to look at language. And we can destigmatize the process by recognizing that they are a person first with an addiction second. And, we can say to them, I love you, I'm worried about you, and I will be here to help you. But we also have to recognize that until a person is ready to stop, we can put a lot of resources into them. I can send somebody to prison for 10 years, and if they're not ready to stop, they're going to come out of prison day one and be right back to where they were. So being able to recognize that we have to work on ourselves as well, getting family members into support, getting them connected, getting them education, helps them to understand how the system works, what the resources are, and where they can go. And, the Office of Behavioral Health has on their website a lot of resources for all the licensed clinicians and programs that are in the state, across the state. You can Google stuff, but I recommend reaching out and talking to other family members and asking about their journey and what helped them get their person sober. Do you want to answer?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Too, Casey?
Yeah, kind of going off of what you said, just it's hard, right, with a loved one. You constantly see them killing themselves on a daily basis. I've experienced addiction. I witnessed addiction. Scary. And just looking at it from a non-judgmental perspective and saying this person is in pain, hurting, in survival mode. What am I going to do? And meeting them where they're at. They're miserable, right? They don't want to change. That's all they know. Scared to death, afraid to live, scared to die. And kind of in between. And what I found that helps, right, is community connection, the commonality piece. So Al-Anon, if you have a suffering alcoholic or addict, and gaining that support, so there is separation, right? The codependent and the addict. Great relationship. Works really, really well, right?
Perfect.
And looking at the separation piece and knowing I have no control over what that person does, but I'm not going to enable anymore, right? I'm going to set my boundaries up so I keep myself safe, but also I'm keeping that person safe. I've mother and daughter, my sister, right? Constant money, whatever it is, cut it off. It's constantly keeping yourself safe because this person is sick, in a sense. I don't even like the term sick. injured, I like to say. And they're in pain. They don't, again, going back to like what I said, they don't want to wake up and be a drug addict or an alcoholic. They're a human. And even looking at my name with take the freaking letters off, right? And just looking at my first name, I'm a human. This person is in pain, and what can I do? I'm going to sit there with you, but I'm not going to take on your pain. This is something that they have to do. And sometimes they never do it. They remain in the cycle, and that's probably the hardest thing, is to watch someone that you care about so much and flush their life right down, right? But knowing that they don't want to be there too. It's very confusing, it's tricky, and I always say boundaried. And what am I going to do to keep myself safe? But what am I going to do for that individual so they feel supported and loved, and knowing that they're not alone, and that they do belong, and that I want them here. Again, going back to the pandemic and whatnot, survival looked really messy, very messy. We were all going through it and not knowing what was going to happen. Obviously, higher rates of overdoses and whatnot. But I think just really just meeting them where they're at, and the separation piece, and knowing you can't fix them is one of the hardest pills to swallow, I think.
Thank you all so much. I realize we might have more questions, but I am a stickler for time because I promised you all at the beginning we'd be a stickler for time. It's 8:20, and according to my notes at 8:20, what's that? 8:21? 8:21. I lied. I want to give you all, yeah, I should ding myself. I want to give each of the panel members 2 minutes of closing remarks, and then we will wrap things up.
Okay.
And Casey, I want to invite you to go first, then Lacey, then Josh.
Closing remarks. Let's see.
And I got to time this part.
Going back to the individual, what could I do, right? As me. Being aware, gaining that awareness and consciousness of knowing what am I actually, a lot of it is projection, right? And seeing and healing myself, therefore healing others. A lot of times the unhealed becomes the healer, and then the codependent and the addict, the whole thing that I was talking about. But just really taking a look at self and what's coming up for you. I think if we start with the individual, that tends to spread out. And if we provide a safe place where we're not shame-inducing and we're kind of welcoming and inclusive and supportive, and I think there is possibility for a huge shift and change if each individual works on themselves, and then it becomes, the micro becomes macro, and starting with the individual of what's coming up for me. And knowing that you're not alone if you're the addict or the one dealing with an addict or a loved one. And you're not alone.
Beautiful. Thank you for that, Casey. Dr. Lacey.
Okay.
2-minute closing remarks.
2-minute closing remarks. You guys were given packets when you first came in. These are drug disposal packets. So how you would use them is, don't open them now, but you tear them apart. You put the prescriptions in here that you're no longer having, that all of us have in our cabinets at home. The amount of water, and then seal it up, shake it. It deactivates the drugs that you put on the inside, whether liquid, patch, or pill form, and then you can throw them away safely. Please don't flush them down your toilet to get rid of them. That just makes for really pain-free fish in our septic system. The other thing that we have available for you guys, compliments of Transition Sober Housing, thank you for that, is we actually have some Narcan. So for those of you, I don't think we have enough to give one to everybody, but for those of you that are either around people who potentially have opioid issues, or you yourself may have an opioid issue, please take one of these. It's a nasal spray. It just, you stick it in your nose and you spray it. That's it. It will not hurt you. It will not hurt if you give it to someone and it's not an overdose, okay? It's not gonna fix them per se. What it does is it's going to buy you time, especially with fentanyl, because fentanyl slows your breathing, and that's what you end up dying from, is you end up stopping breathing. It will buy you a little time, but if you find somebody down, please use this. You're not going to get charged with malpractice or anything like that, because it is prescribed under a medical order in this state from the chief medical officer. It's not going to hurt anybody. It's good for 3 years. So if you use it, get another one. Go to the pharmacy and get one. But everyone should have them in your house. If you have anybody that's being treated with chronic pain or anything else, cancer, where they're going to have these opiates, please have this, because it's usually not the person that is being treated for cancer that gets a hold of the opiates. It's an addict who is struggling. So dispose of your meds. Take the Narcan if you need it. Transition Sober Living donated these for tonight. And our friends at Rally gave these to our company to be able to put out for you guys.
Rally. And thank you for that, Lacey. And let me just say, if we run out of, the Narcan is on the side. If we run out of that, let me know. We will get more if anyone needs Narcan. I know Lacey keeps it on her. Josh was telling me everyone at Denver Rescue Mission carries it on their Bing. We have it here at Free. It's just such an important case. I know you have it too in your office and wherever you are. And I know a lot of you here have it. But if you're in need of more, let us know. We can hook you up. And thank you, Scott, for hooking us up tonight from Transition Sober Living. And thank you and to Rally for giving us the what do we call it? The
Deterra drug disposal bags.
Deterra drug disposal bags.
Yeah.
Oprah gives away weekend getaways as door prizes. We give away drug disposal bags. That's how we do it.
Yes, you get a bag, and you get a bag, and you get a bag.
And everyone look under their seat. A free car.
So
John,
we have plenty of these. Take. If you need them for your parents, if you need them for, we've got it. We've got a lot of them, and he is the keeper of the box.
Yes. Thank you, Lacey. All right, Josh.
Closing remarks. I think speaking from the viewpoint of folks experiencing homelessness, one opportunity that exists for folks experiencing homelessness, regardless of their substance use issues, is that usually when we're interfacing with people at the corner of Park Avenue and Lawrence Street downtown, it's because they've burned all their bridges. They are as close to rock bottom as one will probably get. And so in our attempts to rehouse people, to reemploy people, to get people sort of moving back towards some sense of stability, one of the biggest issues that we face is folks develop community in a shelter, and then we rehouse them in isolation. And so we see time and time again, people will come back to the shelter to eat a meal because that's where their friends are. And so one of the biggest needs we have is for partners to come alongside folks that are moving into housing, to come alongside of folks that are getting out of rehab, and just befriend them. We need folks to have community connections that exist where they're being rehoused, so they don't have to return to where they came from in order to have a sense of community. This can be faith communities, there's the gospel that might spur you on, but it doesn't have to be faith communities. I mean, I think oftentimes the issue that we see is folks get used to living in anonymity, and they've never caught a vision for what that looks like. And so, having a person you can call, having a person that calls you. I have a friend that I made years ago named Scott, who has since moved to Nevada. And for some reason, because of Scott's life and family situation, I'm still the person that Scott calls when there's good news. I'm still the person that Scott calls when there's bad news. I've probably spent the totality of my life 20 hours with Scott. And so it doesn't take a lot of investment if you're willing to do it. And again, this isn't just folks that are in the midst of recovery or who have an addiction issue. This is an issue that everyone who has experienced homelessness will face. If that's an individual or a family unit, as they get rehoused, they don't have the community connections that all of us are so used to. And so if I'm pulling on your heartstrings, that was intentional. I'd love to talk to you. There's lots of different ways to engage individually, as a group, but people experiencing homelessness need community of folks that aren't experiencing homelessness.
Thank you for that, Josh. If you want to connect to that more, what he was talking about, Josh is going to stick around and talk to him, figure out a way to get involved. Thank you. Can we give a huge round of applause for each of our panel members? Thank you all for giving up your time, your energy, for driving 16 hours to be with us tonight. So, so grateful. Thank you all online for being with us. Thank you all in-house for being with us tonight. We here at Free would love to be a resource to you. This is a community breaking the silence of addiction, creating space for healing, recovery, and spiritual connection. If you are isolated in some way right now, if you're struggling, you need to know you're not alone. Y'all need to know you're not alone. We would love to be a community that walks with you. We have a service here every Saturday night at 7 p.m. We would love to have you join us online, and I promise y'all there's a whole ton of people here who are going to love you, walk with you, and be with you to remind you you are not alone, and we do not do shame. Thank you all for being here tonight. Let's give one more round of applause to our panel members. Grace and peace to each of you. We will see you next time.